The morning fog settled over the village of St. Agnes like a shroud, thick and white, muffling the world in a silence that felt almost sacred. Father Thomas Brennan moved through it, with the practiced ease of a man who had walked these same paths for 15 years, his black cassock brushing against wet grass as he made his way from the small stone rectory to the larger house beyond. His steps were measured, unhurried. At 72 years old, he had learned that haste solved nothing, that patience was the greatest virtue a man could cultivate in this life. The house rose before him, a sprawling Victorian structure that had once served as the parish house when St. Agnes had a larger congregation, back when the village thrived and children played in the streets. Now those streets were quiet. The young had moved to cities and the old remained, forgotten by families too busy to care, too distant to remember. Father Thomas had transformed the old parish house into something else entirely, a refuge for the abandoned, a place where elderly men and women could live out their final years with dignity, with care, with someone who remembered their names. He entered through the kitchen door, the hinges creaking softly in the pre-dawn quiet. Inside, the smell of coffee already filled the air. Mrs. Callahan stood at the stove, her bent frame wrapped in a thick shawl, despite the warmth from the oven. She had been the first to arrive, 7 years ago, her daughter having deposited her at the church steps with a suitcase and hollow apologies about expenses and space. Father Thomas had taken her in without question, as he did all who came. "Good morning, Father," she said, her voice thin but steady. "I made extra biscuits. Mr. Doyle said his hip was aching something fierce last night. Thought the warm food might help." Father Thomas smiled, the expression softening the hard lines of his face, lines that spoke of years lived, of stories untold. "You are a blessing, Margaret." "Thank you." He moved through the house, checking on each of the 12 residents. Mr. Doyle in his room on the first floor, groaning softly as arthritis tortured joints worn down by decades of factory work. Sister Mary Catherine, who was not actually a nun, but had earned the title through her decades of volunteer work at hospitals, sitting in her chair by the window, rosary beads clicking softly between gnarled fingers. Thomas O'Brien, blind now and confused most days, calling out for his wife who had been dead for 30 years. Father Thomas sat with him, held his hand, spoke in low, soothing tones, until the old man calmed and drifted back into shallow sleep. This was his life now. This was his penance. This was his redemption. He had come to St. Agnes 15 years ago, appearing one winter morning with nothing but a worn leather bag and a letter of introduction from a bishop in the neighboring diocese. The previous priest had retired, moved to a care facility himself, and the parish was desperate for someone, anyone, to tend the small flock that remained. Father Thomas had accepted the position without negotiation, asking for nothing beyond a roof and the opportunity to serve. The bishop had been grateful. No questions were asked about his past, about the years before his ordination, about the gaps in his service record. In the Catholic Church, especially in dying parishes, discretion was often more valued than curiosity. The morning passed in familiar rhythms. Breakfast served at 8, medications distributed at 9, morning prayers at 10 for those who wished to attend. Father Thomas led the prayers in the small chapel attached to the house, his voice steady and low, the Latin words flowing with an ease that suggested deep familiarity. Afterward, he helped Mr. Patterson with his physical therapy exercises, read letters to Mrs. Chen, who could no longer see well enough to make out the words from her granddaughter in California, changed bedsheets, cleaned bathrooms, performed the endless small tasks that kept 12 elderly people comfortable and cared for. He worked without complaint, without expectation of recognition. The village respected him. The few younger residents who remained would nod when they saw him in the street, would donate food or supplies when they could. Father Thomas had become part of the landscape, as permanent and unremarkable as the old church itself. But that afternoon, as autumn sun broke through the morning fog and cast long shadows across the village square, something changed. A black car appeared on the main road, moving slowly, too slowly, as if the driver were searching for something. It was a Mercedes, new and expensive, its dark windows reflecting the faded storefronts and empty sidewalks. In a village where most drove trucks or old sedans held together by prayer and duct tape, the vehicle stood out like a diamond in mud. Father Thomas was walking back from the market, a bag of vegetables in each hand, when he saw the car pass. Something in his chest tightened, an old instinct he thought he had buried rising suddenly to the surface. He forced himself to keep walking, forced his pace to remain steady, unhurried. Just a car, just a stranger passing through. The village saw them sometimes, tourists who took a wrong turn, businessmen cutting through rural routes to avoid highway traffic. But the car did not pass through. It stopped in front of the church and a young man stepped out. He was perhaps 30, dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than most of the village earned in a month. His dark hair was slicked back, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. He wore sunglasses despite the autumn clouds, and his movements carried the particular confidence of a man accustomed to being obeyed. He looked around the square with barely concealed contempt, his lip curling slightly at the shabby buildings, the cracked sidewalks, the poverty that hung over everything like the morning fog. Father Thomas recognized the type immediately. The suit could not hide it. The expensive car could not disguise it. This was a made man, a soldier, someone connected to one of the families. The way he stood, the way he scanned his surroundings with predator awareness, the slight bulge under his left arm where a shoulder holster rested, all of it screamed mob, screamed danger, screamed a world that Father Thomas had spent 15 years trying to forget. The young man's eyes found him across the square. For a moment they simply looked at each other, the distance between them feeling both infinite and terrifyingly small. Then the young man smiled, removed his sunglasses, and began walking toward him. Father Thomas considered running. Every instinct from his old life screamed at him to drop the bags, to disappear into one of the alleys between buildings, to vanish the way he had vanished 15 years ago. But he was 72 now. His knees ached, and more importantly, he was not that man anymore. He had promised himself, promised God if such promises mattered, that he would never run again. So he stood his ground and waited. The young man stopped a few feet away, still smiling that predator smile. "Excuse me, Father, I'm looking for someone. Perhaps you can help me." His accent carried the unmistakable cadence of New York, of the boroughs, of streets where English mixed with Italian and created something entirely its own. Father Thomas felt another piece of his carefully constructed peace crumble away. "I will help if I can," Father Thomas said, his own voice revealing nothing, flat and calm. "Who are you looking for?" An old man would have come here maybe 15, 20 years ago, kept to himself. Probably used a different name. The young man pulled a photograph from his jacket pocket, old and creased, and held it out. "Ever seen this man?" Father Thomas did not need to look at the photograph. He knew what it would show, but he looked anyway, because not looking would be suspicious, would reveal knowledge he could not afford to reveal. The picture showed a man in his 50s, dark hair graying at the temples, strong jaw, eyes that seemed to look through the camera rather than at it. He wore an expensive suit, stood beside another man, older, heavier, with the bearing of authority. Father Thomas recognized both men. The older one was Don Carmine Rossi, head of the Rossi family, one of the 5 families that had controlled New York for generations. The younger man, standing slightly behind and to the left in the traditional position of the consigliere, the advisor, the counselor, was Tomás Santoro. Was himself, had been himself, a lifetime ago. "I am sorry," Father Thomas said, handing back the photograph. "I do not recognize him. What is his name?" The young man studied him for a long moment, and Father Thomas felt the weight of that gaze, felt it searching for cracks in his facade, for tells that would betray recognition. But Father Thomas had been a consigliere for 23 years before he disappeared. He had sat across tables from men far more dangerous than this young soldier, had negotiated treaties and ordered executions with a face that revealed nothing. He held the young man's stare without blinking, without flinching. His name, the young man said slowly, was Tomás Santoro. But he might be using something else now. Thomas, maybe, Tommy. Tom. The use of his old name, spoken aloud after 15 years of silence, felt like a knife sliding between his ribs. But Father Thomas simply shook his head. "I am sorry, I have not heard that name. Why are you looking for him?" "Business. Old business." The young man smiled again, and this time there was something cruel in it, something that enjoyed the fear it could create. "My name is Vincent Marcello. I am a capo in the Bellini family. Perhaps you have heard of us." Father Thomas had indeed heard of them. The Bellini family had been a minor outfit 15 years ago, enforcers and muscle for the larger families. That they now had their own capo, their own soldiers, suggested they had grown significantly in the intervening years. The underworld was always changing, always shifting, power flowing like water into whatever vessel could hold it. "I am afraid I do not follow such things," Father Thomas said. "I am simply a priest in a small village caring for the elderly. I cannot help you." Vincent Marcello's smile faded. He stepped closer, close enough that Father Thomas could smell expensive cologne and cigarette smoke. "Cannot, Father, or will not. Cannot. I do not know this man you seek." For a moment, tension hung between them, sharp and dangerous. Then Vincent stepped back, his smile returning but not reaching his eyes. "Of course. Forgive me, Father, I did not mean to be aggressive. It is just this man, Tomas Santoro. He disappeared a long time ago. During a very difficult time for the families. Many people died, many questions were never answered. My Don, Marco Bellini, he would very much like to speak with Santoro, to understand what happened that night." The night. Always it came back to the night of long knives, some had called it afterward, the Great Purge, the Blood Wedding. 15 years ago, when internal war had nearly destroyed all 5 families, when dozens had died in a single evening of coordinated hits, when the old order had collapsed and new powers had risen from the ashes. Tomas Santoro had disappeared that night, had walked away from Don Carmine's dinner table and never returned. Most assumed he was dead, buried in one of 100 unmarked graves. Some few suspected he had orchestrated the whole thing, had betrayed them all for reasons known only to himself. The truth was more complicated, as truth always was. "I am sorry I cannot help you," Father Thomas repeated. "If you will excuse me, I have responsibilities at the parish house." He moved to step around Vincent, but the young man shifted, blocking his path with casual menace. "One more thing, Father. This village, it is very small, very isolated. People here, they must trust you very much, yes? Coming to confession, telling you their secrets." Father Thomas felt his jaw tighten but kept his expression neutral. "The seal of confession is sacred. I would never betray that trust, of course not." Vincent's smile widened. "But perhaps, if you hear anything, if someone mentions seeing a stranger, an old man who keeps to himself, you might let me know. I will be staying at the inn for a few days, doing some looking around." He pulled out a business card, pressed it into Father Thomas's hand. The card was simple, expensive cardstock with nothing but a phone number embossed in gold. No name, no address, just the number. A mob calling card. "Think about it, Father. My Don is a generous man to those who help him, and he can be very unforgiving to those who lie to him." Without waiting for a response, Vincent turned and walked back to his car. He drove away slowly, the Mercedes disappearing down the main road, but Father Thomas knew he had not left, not really. Vincent Marcello would be watching now, observing, looking for any sign, any connection to the man he sought. Father Thomas stood in the square for a long moment, the vegetables growing heavy in his arms, his heart beating faster than it had in 15 years. Then he forced himself to move, to walk back to the parish house, to continue the routines that had defined his new life. But inside, in the places where Tomas Santoro still lived, still remembered, still calculated, he knew with absolute certainty that his carefully constructed peace was over. That night, after the residents were settled and the house was quiet, Father Thomas sat alone in the small chapel. He did not pray. He had not truly prayed in 15 years, had only performed the rituals, spoken the words, maintained the appearance. His faith had died that night, buried with Don Carmine and the dozens of others who had fallen. Instead, he thought about Vincent Marcello, about the Bellini family, about Marco Bellini, who now ruled where others once stood. He thought about the photograph, about how Vincent had found this place, about what it meant that after 15 years of silence, someone was looking again. And he thought about the choices that had brought him here, to this small village, to this quiet life caring for the forgotten and abandoned. He had believed, or perhaps simply hoped, that enough time and enough good deeds could erase the past, could balance the scales, could transform Tomas Santoro into Father Thomas Brennan. But the past did not die. It waited, patient and hungry, for the moment to return. In the darkness of the chapel, illuminated only by the flickering eternal flame above the altar, Father Thomas allowed himself to remember. Not everything, not yet, but enough. He remembered Don Carmine's face as the old man had looked at him across the dinner table that final night, confusion and betrayal mixing in eyes that had trusted him completely. He remembered the gunfire starting, the screams, the blood spreading across white tablecloths like spilled wine. He remembered walking away, leaving it all behind, disappearing into the night while the 5 families tore themselves apart. He remembered why he had done it, and he remembered the weight of every decision, every death, every consequence. The chapel offered no comfort, no absolution. The statues stared down with painted eyes that saw nothing, forgave nothing. Father Thomas sat in the pew until dawn began to lighten the stained glass windows, casting colored shadows across the stone floor. When he finally stood, his knees protesting, his back aching, he was no longer certain which man he was. The priest who cared for the elderly and sought redemption through service, or the consigliere, who had once held the fate of thousands in his hands and had made choices that still echoed through the underworld. Perhaps he was both. Perhaps he had always been both. Outside, the village was waking. Mrs. Callahan would already be in the kitchen, making coffee and biscuits. Mr. Doyle would be awake, complaining about his hip. The day's routines waited, familiar and comforting. But Father Thomas knew that Vincent Marcello was also awake, watching, waiting, searching. The game had begun again, whether he wanted it or not. And games in the world of the families, in the world of blood and omerta and ancient vendettas, only ever ended one way. Vincent Marcello sat in the cramped room at the village inn, staring at the water-stained ceiling and fighting the urge to put his fist through the thin plaster walls. 3 days in this forgotten corner of nowhere, 3 days of watching and waiting and finding exactly nothing. The priest went about his routines with the predictability of a Swiss clock, morning prayers tending to the old people, shopping at the pathetic excuse for a market, evening prayers lights out by 9, no phone calls to mysterious numbers, no midnight meetings, no suspicious behavior whatsoever. Yet Vincent's instincts, honed through 10 years of working his way up from street soldier to capo, screamed that Father Thomas Brennan was not what he appeared to be. Something about the way the old priest had looked at the photograph, the absolute control in his expression, the way his hands had not trembled even slightly when Vincent had crowded into his space. Normal priests got nervous around men like Vincent. They stammered, looked away, radiated the discomfort of decent people confronted with violence barely contained. Father Thomas had done none of that. He had met Vincent's eyes with the calm of a man accustomed to danger, accustomed to threat. That kind of calm did not come from prayer and service. It came from experience, from having looked into the abyss and learned not to blink. Vincent's phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. The screen showed a number he recognized immediately. His pulse quickened as he answered. Yes, Don Bellini. The voice on the other end was smooth, cultured, carrying the weight of absolute authority. Vincent, report. Have you found our missing counselor? I believe so, Don Bellini. There is a priest here, calls himself Thomas Brennan, but the age matches, the timing matches, and something about him feels wrong. Too controlled, too calm. Feelings are not facts, Vincent. Marco Bellini's tone cooled slightly, a warning. I sent you to find Tomas Santoro, not to develop theories about suspicious priests. Do you have proof? Not yet, Don Bellini. But I am certain he is here. I can feel it. A long pause, then a sigh. You have 48 hours, Vincent. Either bring me proof that Father Brennan is Santoro, or return to New York and we will pursue other leads. I'm not interested in hunches. I need certainty. The line went dead. Vincent stared at the phone, jaw clenched. 48 hours. He needed to push harder, needed to force the priest to reveal himself. But how did you break a man who had already walked away from everything, who had chosen poverty and service over power and respect? Everyone had a weakness. Everyone had something they valued enough to protect. Vincent just needed to find what Father Thomas cared about most. The answer came to him with sudden clarity. The old people, the 12 forgotten souls in that crumbling house. Father Thomas moved through that place like it was sacred ground, tended to those decrepit bodies with a care that bordered on reverence. A man who had once advised Don Carmine Rossi, who had ordered executions and negotiated territory disputes, now changed bedpans and read letters to the blind. Either it was an elaborate cover, or the old consigliere had found something in that work that mattered to him, something worth protecting. Vincent smiled. Time to test which. The next morning, Father Thomas was helping Mrs. Callahan with the laundry when he heard the commotion from the front of the house. Voices raised and angry, followed by the crash of something breaking. He dropped the sheet he was folding and moved quickly toward the sound, his heart already racing. In the entrance hall, Vincent Marcello stood surrounded by 3 other men, all young, all dressed in the casual, expensive clothes of mob soldiers. One of them held Mr. Doyle by the arm, the old man's face twisted in pain and confusion. Another had pushed Sister Mary Catherine into a chair, looming over her as she clutched her rosary with trembling hands. The third stood by the door, arms crossed, blocking any exit. Vincent turned as Father Thomas entered, his smile cold and satisfied. "Good morning, Father. I hope we are not interrupting your morning prayers. What is the meaning of this?" Father Thomas kept his voice level despite the rage building in his chest. "These people have done nothing to you. Let them go." "Oh, but they have done something, Father. They have been harboring a fugitive. A man wanted for questioning about events that occurred 15 years ago. Very serious events. I told you, I do not know who you are looking for." Father Thomas moved further into the room, positioning himself between Vincent and the elderly residents who were beginning to emerge from their rooms, drawn by the noise and fear. "These people are under my protection. You will leave now, your protection." Vincent laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "And what exactly can you offer them, old man? You think your collar makes you untouchable? You think we respect the church?" His voice dropped, becoming deadly serious. "I respect only one thing, Father. Power. And right now, I have all of it in this room." One of the soldiers, the one holding Mr. Doyle, shook the old man roughly. "This one claims he has lived here for 5 years. Says the good father took him in when his family abandoned him." Very touching. But see, I'm wondering if maybe the father took him in for another reason. Maybe to have eyes and ears, people who would be loyal, who would not ask questions. Mr. Doyle whimpered, his arthritic legs barely supporting his weight. Father Thomas felt something cold and familiar settling over him, a state of mind he had not allowed himself to enter in 15 years. It was the place Tomas Santoro had lived, the calm center where violence could be calculated and executed without hesitation or regret. He forced it down. He was not that man anymore. Could not be that man anymore. "Please," Father Thomas said, and hated the pleading note in his voice, hated the weakness it implied. "Whatever you want from me, whatever you think I know, we can discuss it. Just leave these people alone. They are innocent." Innocent. Vincent walked slowly toward him, his soldiers watching with the anticipation of predators sensing a kill. "Nobody is innocent, Father. Not in this world. Everyone has sins. Everyone has secrets. The only question is how much pain they are willing to endure to keep those secrets hidden." He stopped inches from Father Thomas, close enough that the priest could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, could smell the cigarettes and coffee on his breath. "So let me ask you again, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. Have you seen Tomas Santoro?" Father Thomas held his gaze, held it the way he had held the stares of far more dangerous men across far more dangerous tables. "No, I have not seen him." Vincent's hand moved in a blur, striking Father Thomas across the face with casual brutality. The old priest staggered, tasting blood, his vision momentarily darkening. Somewhere behind him, Mrs. Callahan screamed. Sister Mary Catherine began praying loudly, her voice shaking. Wrong answer. Vincent grabbed Father Thomas by the collar, pulled him close. "Let me tell you what I think, old man. I think you are Tomas Santoro. I think you came to this pathetic village 15 years ago to hide, to play priest, to pretend you could wash the blood off your hands with charity and prayer. I think you are a coward who betrayed his don and ran like a frightened child." Father Thomas said nothing, his mind racing. Vincent had no proof, only suspicion. If he could endure this, if he could maintain his facade, Vincent would eventually have to leave. 48 hours, he had said on the phone. Vincent was on a deadline. But then Vincent released him, stepped back, and nodded to his soldiers. "Since you will not be cooperative, Father, perhaps we need to provide motivation." He pointed to Mr. Doyle. "Take him." "No." The word came out harder than Father Thomas intended, carrying an authority that made Vincent pause, made his soldiers hesitate. "You will not touch him." Vincent studied him with renewed interest. There it is. A flash of the real man underneath. "Tell me, Father, or whatever you really are, why do you care so much about these people? They are nothing, abandoned by their families, forgotten by the world. Why waste your time?" "Because they deserve dignity," Father Thomas said quietly. "Because everyone deserves to be cared for in their final years. Because someone must remember that they existed, that their lives mattered." Beautiful sentiment. Vincent's smile returned, sharp and cruel. "Let us test it." He walked to Sister Mary Catherine, pulled her up from the chair by her thin arm. She cried out, her rosary falling to the floor, beads scattering across the worn wood. Vincent produced a gun, a small 9mm, and pressed it to her temple. The old woman went rigid with terror, her lips moving in silent prayer. The room seemed to freeze, time stretching into something elastic and terrible. Father Thomas felt his heartbeat slow, felt his breathing steady, felt Tomas Santoro rising inside him like a tide that could not be stopped. "Last chance," Vincent said softly. "Are you Tomas Santoro?" The calculation was instantaneous, automatic, the product of 23 years as a consigliere. Vincent would not kill Sister Mary Catherine, not yet. It would accomplish nothing, would eliminate his leverage. This was theater, intimidation designed to break resistance. Vincent wanted confession, not corpses. He needed proof to bring back to Don Bellini, needed Tomas Santoro alive to answer questions about that night 15 years ago. But Vincent was also young, arrogant, his temper barely controlled. Push him too far and he might do something stupid, might pull the trigger in frustration and destroy his own leverage. The room held its breath. The other residents had emerged, clustering in doorways, watching with fear and confusion. Mrs. Callahan stood near the kitchen, one hand over her mouth. Thomas O'Brien called out in his blind confusion, asking what was happening, why were people shouting? Father Thomas looked at Sister Mary Catherine, at her aged face frozen in terror, at her lips forming prayers to a God who seemed very far away. He thought about the 7 years she had lived here, about the countless hours she had spent reading to the other residents, about the gentle way she would hold their hands when they were frightened or in pain. He thought about Mr. Doyle, about Mrs. Callahan, about all of them. These people who had been discarded, forgotten, left to die alone. He had given them a home, had given them dignity, had tried in some small way to atone for all the deaths he had caused, all the lives he had destroyed. And he realized with terrible clarity that it had all been a lie. Not the care, not the compassion, but the belief that he could ever truly leave his old life behind. Tomas Santoro had not died 15 years ago. He had simply been sleeping, waiting, hiding behind prayers and service. Vincent pressed the gun harder against Sister Mary Catherine's head. "I am losing patience, Father." "You are making a mistake," Father Thomas said, his voice carrying a weight it had not held in 15 years, a quiet authority that made Vincent's finger pause on the trigger. "You do not want to do this." "Do not tell me what I want, old man." Father Thomas took a step forward, his hands open and visible. "You think you are the first soldier to threaten an innocent to get what you want? You think you are the first young capo hungry to prove himself? I have seen 1,000 like you, Vincent Marcello. Most of them are dead now." Something shifted in Vincent's expression, confusion mixing with the anger. "What? You want proof? You want me to confess?" "Very well." Father Thomas took another step, his voice dropping to the tone he had used in conference rooms and back offices, the voice that had advised Don Carmine through wars and truces and betrayals. "But first you will put down the gun and let Sister Mary Catherine sit, because if you harm her, I promise you on everything I once held sacred that you will not leave this village alive." The words hung in the air like a curse. Vincent stared at him, seeing for the first time not the tired old priest, but the man beneath, the consigliere, who had survived decades in a world that devoured the weak and foolish. Slowly, keeping the gun trained on Sister Mary Catherine, Vincent spoke. "You are him. You are Santoro. Does it matter now?" Father Thomas smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only the cold calculation that had once made him the most feared advisor in New York. "You came looking for the past, Vincent. Congratulations. You found it. Now live with the consequences." For a long moment, the standoff held. Then Vincent laughed, the sound genuine this time, delighted. "Don Bellini will be very pleased. He has so many questions for you, Santoro. So many things he wants to understand about that night. I am sure he does." Father Thomas gestured to Sister Mary Catherine. "The gun, now." Vincent considered, then lowered the weapon, releasing the old woman. She collapsed back into the chair, sobbing. Mrs. Callahan rushed to her, wrapping her in a protective embrace. "You will come with us," Vincent said. "Peacefully, or my men will drag you. Your choice." Father Thomas looked around the room, at the faces of the people he had cared for, protected, given a home. They stared back with confusion and fear, not understanding what was happening, who he really was. "I need 1 hour," he said, "to make arrangements for these people, to ensure they will be cared for in my absence. Surely Don Bellini is not so impatient that he cannot wait 60 minutes more after 15 years. Vincent considered this, then nodded. 1 hour. My men stay here to make sure you do not try anything foolish. And Father or Santoro or whatever you call yourself now, do not mistake my patience for weakness. You try to run, and I will burn this house down with everyone in it. I understand." Vincent and one of his soldiers left, the Mercedes pulling away toward the inn. The other two remained, flanking the door, watching Father Thomas with the wary attention of men who had just realized they were guarding something far more dangerous than an old priest. Father Thomas moved through the house in a daze, his mind churning. He called the bishop's office, explained that he needed to leave suddenly for a family emergency, requested that a replacement be sent immediately to care for the residents. The bishop's secretary assured him someone would arrive by evening. He called the local doctor, asked her to check on everyone, especially Sister Mary Catherine, who had experienced a severe shock. Then he went to each resident individually, holding their hands, assuring them that everything would be fine, that they would be cared for, that he was sorry for the disturbance. Most did not understand what had happened, which was perhaps a mercy. Those who did, like Mrs. Callahan, looked at him with questions they did not dare ask. In his small room, Father Thomas changed from his cassock into simple civilian clothes, black pants and a dark shirt. He packed nothing. Where he was going, belongings would not matter. The hour passed too quickly. Vincent returned, his satisfaction evident in every movement. "Ready, Santoro?" Father Thomas nodded. He turned to look at the house one last time, at the place that had been his sanctuary, his refuge, his attempt at redemption. Then he walked to the car without looking back. As they drove away from St. Agnes, Vincent could not contain his triumph. "You know, I did not truly believe it until you confessed. Even with all the signs, part of me thought maybe I was chasing shadows. But you are really him, the legendary Thomas Santoro, advisor to Don Carmine Rossi, the man who disappeared the night the families nearly destroyed each other." Father Thomas stared out the window, watching the village recede behind them. "I am Father Thomas Brennan now. Tomas Santoro died 15 years ago." "Did he?" Vincent lit a cigarette, cracked his window. "Funny. He seemed very much alive back there when you threatened me. That voice, that authority. My uncle used to tell me stories about you, about how Don Carmine never made a move without consulting his consigliere first. They said you could end wars with words, could see betrayal coming months before it happened. They said you were the real power behind the throne. They were wrong. The Don was the power. I was only his advisor." Vincent laughed. "Sure. Whatever helps you sleep at night." He glanced at Father Thomas through the rearview mirror. "Did it work, by the way? All those years playing priest, caring for the forgotten? Did you find the redemption you were looking for?" Father Thomas did not answer. The truth was, he did not know. 15 years of service, 15 years of trying to balance the scales, and in the end, It had taken less than 5 minutes for Tomas Santoro to resurface, ready and willing to threaten violence to protect what mattered. Perhaps you could not wash off blood, no matter how much you tried. Perhaps once you became a certain kind of man, that was what you remained forever and always. They drove for hours, heading south toward New York, toward the city Father Thomas had fled in the chaos of that terrible night. Vincent made several phone calls, speaking in rapid Italian, reporting to someone, receiving instructions. Father Thomas listened with half his attention, the other half already moving ahead, planning, calculating what would come next. Don Marco Bellini wanted answers about that night, about why Tomas Santoro had disappeared, about what role he had played in the massacre that had killed Don Carmine and 24 others, about why the old alliances had collapsed and new powers had risen. Father Thomas could give him answers. But truth was a dangerous commodity in the world of the families, more lethal than any gun, more devastating than any bomb. Marco Bellini thought he wanted to know what had happened 15 years ago. He had no idea what he was really asking for. As the sun set and the lights of New York began to glow on the horizon, Father Thomas allowed himself a moment of grief for the life he was leaving behind, for Father Thomas Brennan, who had been briefly a good man trying to do good things. Then he buried that grief deep, locked it away where it could not be reached. Tomas Santoro was returning to the city, and the city, whether it knew yet or not, was about to remember why his name had once inspired fear. The mansion stood in the old quarter of Brooklyn, a fortress of stone and iron that had witnessed decades of power struggles, betrayals, and blood. Don Marco Bellini had acquired it 7 years ago when the previous owner, a capo from the Genovese family, had been found floating in the East River with his throat cut. The message had been clear then, as it was now. This was territory that belonged to the Bellini family, and anyone who challenged that claim would meet the same fate. Father Thomas, he could not think of himself as Thomas yet, not entirely, was led through ornate hallways lined with expensive art and antique furniture. The wealth on display was obscene, deliberately so. In the old days, Don Carmine had believed in discretion, in maintaining the appearance of legitimate business while conducting the real work in shadows. This new generation, represented by Marco Bellini and his kind, had abandoned subtlety. They wanted the world to see their power, their money, their untouchable status. Vincent walked ahead, his satisfaction evident in every step. They passed soldiers standing guard at various points, young men with hard eyes and expensive suits, each one armed and watching the procession with curiosity. Word had spread quickly. The legendary Tomas Santoro, ghost of the old families, had returned. The mansion buzzed with the news like a disturbed hive. They stopped before a heavy oak door. Vincent knocked twice, then opened it without waiting for a response. Inside, a large office stretched out, dominated by a massive desk of dark wood. Behind it sat Marco Bellini. He was younger than Father Thomas expected, perhaps 45, with the build of a man who still worked out daily, who still remembered the streets where he had earned his bones. His dark hair was swept back from a face that would have been handsome if not for the cruelty in his eyes, the hardness that came from years of violence and command. He wore a suit that probably cost $10,000, and he sat in his chair like it was a throne. Standing beside him was another man, older, perhaps 60, thin and watchful. Father Thomas recognized the type immediately, another consigliere, an advisor. The man studied Father Thomas with the professional assessment of someone calculating threats and opportunities. Don Bellini did not rise. He simply stared at Father Thomas for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, and the smile was worse than any threat. Tomas Santoro. After all these years, I'd almost given up hope of finding you. Father Thomas said nothing, simply stood and waited. Vincent had taken a position by the door, blocking any exit. The older man beside Don Bellini remained motionless, his eyes never leaving Father Thomas's face. "Do you know who I am?" Don Bellini asked, his tone conversational, almost friendly. "Marco Bellini, head of the Bellini family. 15 years ago, your father, Salvatore Bellini, was an underboss in the Genovese organization." Father Thomas kept his voice neutral, stating facts without judgment. "You have risen significantly since then." Don Bellini's smile widened. "I have. thanks in large part to the chaos that occurred 15 years ago. The Night of Long Knives, they call it now, when the old order died and the new one was born. You were there that night, Thomas, at Don Carmine's table, and then you disappeared, and Don Carmine and 23 others ended up dead. His tone sharpened. I have always wondered about the timing of that. Many died that night, Father Thomas said carefully. It was a tragedy for all the families, a tragedy. Don Bellini stood now, walked around the desk with measured steps. Is that what you call it? I call it an opportunity. See, when the old bosses died, when their consigliere and underbosses were killed, power became available. Territory opened up. My father, God rest his soul, was smart enough to move quickly, to claim what others were too shocked or too weak to take. He built the foundation of what I have now. But he always wanted to know one thing. He gestured toward Father Thomas. Who orchestrated it? Who was smart enough, connected enough, to coordinate hits across all 5 families simultaneously? The answer always came back to one name: Tomás Santoro. Father Thomas felt the weight of the accusation, felt the danger in this room crystallize into something sharp and immediate. I was Don Carmine's consigliere. I advised him on legitimate business matters. I had nothing to do with what happened that night. Liar. The word came not from Don Bellini but from the older man beside him. He stepped forward, his thin face twisted with anger. I was there, Santoro. I was Salvatore Bellini's driver that night. I saw you leave Don Carmine's estate 20 minutes before the shooting started. I saw you walk out, get into a car, and drive away. And minutes later, all hell broke loose. You knew. You had to know. Father Thomas looked at the man, searched his memory for a face, a name. It came slowly, reluctantly. Carlo Reggio. You were young then, ambitious. You wanted to be more than a driver. Carlo's hand moved toward his jacket, toward the gun doubtless holstered there, but Don Bellini raised a hand, stopping him. Patience, Carlo. We are going to get our answers. He turned back to Father Thomas. Here is what I know. Don Carmine trusted you completely. His own underboss, Vincent Carlucci, hated that, thought you had too much influence, that you were making the Don weak with your caution, your endless negotiations. There were others who felt the same across all the families, underbosses who wanted their Dons dead, who wanted to take power for themselves. His voice dropped, became contemplative. Someone organized them. Someone coordinated the hits to happen simultaneously, so no one family could respond, before the others were also crippled. Someone with connections across all 5 families, someone trusted, someone with access to the most intimate details of Don Carmine's schedule and security. He paused. Someone like you. The office was silent except for the ticking of an antique clock on the wall. Father Thomas considered his options, considered the value of truth versus the safety of lies. But he had been a consigliere long enough to know that lies required maintenance, required more lies to support them, until the whole structure collapsed. Sometimes truth was the sharper weapon. You are half right, Father Thomas said finally. Someone did coordinate the hits. Someone with access and connections. But it was not me. Don Bellini's eyes narrowed. Then who? Vincent Carlucci, Don Carmine's underboss. Father Thomas spoke the name calmly, watching Don Bellini's reaction. He had been planning it for months, recruiting dissatisfied underbosses from the other families, promising them power and territory. He knew Don Carmine would never make him consigliere, would never give him the influence he craved. So he decided to remove the obstacle. And you knew about this? Carlo demanded. You knew and did nothing? I suspected. Father Thomas acknowledged. The signs were there for anyone trained to see them. Meetings that were not recorded, conversations that stopped when I entered rooms, changes in Vincent's behavior and spending. But suspicion is not proof. And accusations without proof destroy the accuser, not the accused. So you ran, Don Bellini said. You knew the hit was coming, and you saved yourself. I tried to warn Don Carmine. Father Thomas felt the old grief rising, the memory of that final conversation. 2 hours before the dinner, I went to him in his office. I told him I believed Vincent was planning something, that we should cancel the dinner, increase security, investigate before proceeding. Do you know what he said to me? The room waited. Even Vincent by the door leaned forward, caught in the story. He said I was getting paranoid in my old age, that Vincent was family, was loyal, would never betray him. He said I needed to trust more, to stop seeing conspiracies in every shadow. Father Thomas smiled bitterly. Don Carmine was a great man, a powerful man, but his weakness was loyalty. He could not imagine that someone he had raised, someone he had trusted with his life, would betray him. Don Bellini returned to his desk, sat heavily. "And so you left." "I went to the dinner. I sat at my place at Don Carmine's right hand. I watched Vincent propose a toast to the Don's health, to the family's prosperity. And I saw in Vincent's eyes when he looked at his watch that it was happening, that everything I had feared was coming true. So yes, I left. I walked out 20 minutes before the shooting started, and I kept walking." Father Thomas met Don Bellini's gaze steadily. "I am not proud of it. I should have stayed, should have died with Don Carmine. But I chose life over loyalty. I chose to disappear rather than die for a man who would not listen." The silence stretched. Carlo looked like he wanted to argue, to call Father Thomas a liar and a coward. But Don Bellini simply studied him, his expression thoughtful. "Vincent Carlucci died that night too," Don Bellini said slowly. "Shot in the head along with Don Carmine. If he was the architect, why did he die?" "Because the other underbosses did not trust him either," Father Thomas replied. "He had served his purpose, had given them the information and coordination they needed. But a man who betrays his Don will betray anyone. So they killed him too, eliminated a witness who could implicate them all." Father Thomas leaned forward slightly. "You want to know who else died that night? Check the records. Every underboss involved in the conspiracy was killed within a week of the Night of Long Knives. The capos who rose to power were second and third tier men, soldiers who had not been part of the inner circles, men like your father, Don Bellini. They survived because they were not trusted enough to be included in the conspiracy." Don Bellini's jaw tightened, anger flashing in his eyes at the insult to his father's memory. But he said nothing, because Father Thomas was right and they both knew it. "If what you say is true," Carlo interjected, "why disappear? Why not come forward? Tell the commission what you knew. Help restore order." "Because I was tired," Father Thomas said simply. "Tired of the blood, tired of the violence, tired of watching good men destroy themselves over territory and respect and ancient grudges. Don Carmine's death broke something in me. I realized that all my advice, all my careful negotiations and strategic planning had meant nothing in the end. He died because he trusted the wrong man, and I lived because I did not trust enough." Father Thomas shook his head, so I walked away. I found a small village, became a priest, tried to do something good with what remained of my life. "Touching," Don Bellini said, his tone making it clear he found nothing touching about it at all. "But you understand, Santoro, that your disappearance created problems. Without you to confirm what happened, without your testimony, the family spent years in chaos. Territories were disputed, alliances shattered, hundreds died in the fighting that followed. You could have prevented much of that. Perhaps. Or perhaps my testimony would have been dismissed, and I would have been killed as a convenient scapegoat." Father Thomas straightened. "I made my choice 15 years ago, Don Bellini. I chose peace over war, redemption over revenge, and I would make the same choice again." Admirable sentiments. Don Bellini stood again, walked to the window overlooking his estate. "But here is my problem, Santoro. Your story is compelling, but I have only your word for it. Vincent Carlucci is long dead and cannot confirm or deny. The other conspirators are dead. For all I know, you were part of it. You helped coordinate the massacre and then disappeared to avoid the consequences." "Then why bring me here?" Father Thomas asked. "If you believe I am guilty, why not simply kill me and be done with it?" Don Bellini turned, smiled that terrible smile again. "Because you are Tomas Santoro. Because even now, after 15 years playing priest in some forgotten village, you still carry authority, still command respect. My soldiers are already whispering about you, about the legendary consigliere who has returned. Do you understand what that means?" "It means you see an opportunity," Father Thomas said quietly. "You want to use my name, my reputation, to consolidate your own power. Smart as ever. Don Bellini approached, stopped a few feet away. The families are fractured, Santoro. Oh, we maintain the appearance of unity. But beneath the surface there is constant tension, constant jockeying for position. The old ways are dying, the young soldiers want to do things differently, and the old-timers resist. I have built something powerful here, but I need more than power. I need legitimacy. I need a connection to the old families, to the golden age before the night of long knives. Father Thomas could see where this was going, could see the trap closing. And you think I can give you that? I know you can. Don Bellini leaned against his desk, arms crossed. Become my consigliere. Advise me as you advised Don Carmine. Lend me your wisdom, your experience, your legendary strategic mind. In return, I will protect you, will give you wealth and comfort, will ensure no one ever threatens you again. And if I refuse, Don Bellini's smile faded, then I will conclude that you were indeed part of the conspiracy, that you betrayed Don Carmine and helped orchestrate the massacre, and I will have you killed slowly and painfully, and I will send pieces of your body to every family as a message about what happens to traitors. He paused. I will also ensure that the village of St. Agnes and that house full of pathetic old people you care so much about burns to the ground. Every resident, every nurse, everyone connected to Father Thomas Brennan will die, and their deaths will be your legacy. The threat hung in the air, naked and absolute. Father Thomas felt the weight of it, felt the carefully constructed peace of 15 years crumbling completely. He thought of Mrs. Callahan and Sister Mary Catherine, of Mr. Doyle and Thomas O'Brien and all the others. He had left them behind to protect them, but Don Bellini would reach them anyway if he chose, would destroy them simply to prove a point. You are not giving me a choice, Father Thomas said. Of course I am. Don Bellini pushed off the desk, extended his hand. Choose to serve, to live, to use your gifts for the benefit of the Bellini family, or choose to die and take everyone you care about with you. It is simple mathematics, Santoro. Your life and theirs, or principles that mean nothing to anyone but yourself. Father Thomas stared at the extended hand, thought about everything it represented. 15 years ago he had walked away from this world, had sworn never to return, but he had always known in the deepest part of himself that the past did not let go so easily, that Tomas Santoro could hide but never truly disappear. And now, here was the bill, come due at last. His service or his soul, his compliance or his conscience. He thought of Don Carmine's face as he had left that dinner, the old man laughing at something Vincent had said, trusting and doomed. He thought of the 12 elderly people in St. Agnes, forgotten by the world but not by him. He thought of Sister Mary Catherine with a gun to her head, of the terror in her eyes. Sometimes there were no good choices. Sometimes you could only choose which evil you could live with. Father Thomas reached out and took Don Marco Bellini's hand. The grip was firm, sealing a bargain that felt like damnation. "Welcome back, consigliere Santoro," Don Bellini said, his smile triumphant. "Welcome home." The first week back was like descending into a familiar nightmare. Tomas Santoro, he had shed the name Father Thomas completely now, found himself once again in conference rooms and back offices, listening to discussions about territory disputes, drug shipments, labor union control, and the endless petty violence that kept the machine of organized crime grinding forward. Don Bellini wanted his counsel on everything, testing him, measuring his value, ensuring the investment was worth the cost. Tomas gave him what he wanted. Advice grounded in decades of experience, strategic thinking that saw 3 moves ahead, the ability to read men and situations that had made him legendary. Within days, Don Bellini's operations ran more smoothly. A territorial dispute with a Russian crew was resolved through negotiation rather than bloodshed, saving both money and men. A potential informant in the ranks was identified and quietly removed before he could damage the organization. A new revenue stream was opened through connections Tomas still maintained from his old life. Don Bellini was delighted. His soldiers looked at Tomas with a mixture of respect and fear, the old-timers remembering stories of the legendary consigliere, the young ones seeing proof that the stories were true. Vincent Marcello, promoted to underboss for his success in finding Tomas, watched everything with barely concealed ambition, already calculating how to use this new situation to his advantage. But Carlo Reggio watched with suspicion and hatred. He did not trust Tomas, did not believe his story about Vincent Carlucci's betrayal, and he made his feelings known in small ways. Contradicting Tomas in meetings, questioning his advice, reminding Don Bellini at every opportunity that this was the man who had abandoned Don Carmine to die. Tomas endured it. He had endured worse in his years advising Don Carmine, had navigated more dangerous political waters. Carlo was transparent in his hostility, which made him predictable, manageable. The real danger came from the ones who smiled while sharpening their knives. He was given a room in the mansion, luxurious and comfortable and utterly suffocating. At night, unable to sleep, Tomas would stand at the window and think about St. Agnes, about the quiet village and the peaceful routines. He had called the bishop's office, learned that a replacement priest had arrived and the residents were being cared for, but he could not call the house itself, could not hear their voices, could not know if they were truly safe, or if Don Bellini had merely postponed their destruction. The uncertainty was its own kind of torture. On the 8th day, Don Bellini summoned him to a private meeting, just the two of them in the Don's office, late in the evening when the mansion had grown quiet. Don Bellini poured them both expensive scotch, gestured for Tomas to sit. "You have done well this week," the Don said, settling into his chair with obvious satisfaction. "Better than I hoped. My father used to say that a good consigliere was worth 10 soldiers, and you are proving him right." "I do what I can, Don Bellini." Tomas sipped the scotch, felt the burn, remembered other nights in other offices with Don Carmine, when scotch meant celebration rather than captivity. "Marco." Don Bellini smiled. "When we are alone, you may call me Marco. We are colleagues now, partners in building something greater than what came before." Tomas nodded, but did not use the name. Familiarity was a tool, a weapon, and he would not give Don Bellini that leverage. "I want to discuss something with you." Don Bellini leaned forward, his expression serious. "There is a situation developing that requires delicate handling. The Colombo family, they are having internal problems. The old Don died 6 months ago and his son Anthony took over, but Anthony is weak, indecisive. Some of his capos are already talking about replacing him. This was dangerous ground. Internal family disputes were supposed to be off-limits, protected by the Commission and the old codes. Interfering could start wars that consumed everyone." "What is your interest in this?" Tomas asked carefully. "Opportunity." Don Bellini's eyes gleamed. "If Anthony falls, there will be chaos in the Colombo territories. Businesses without protection, debts uncollected, operations disrupted. The family that moves quickly, that offers stability and strength, could absorb significant assets before order is restored. You want to take advantage of their weakness," Tomas said, "to expand into Colombo territory while they are distracted by internal conflict." "Exactly." Don Bellini sat back, pleased that Tomas understood immediately. "But I need to do it carefully. If I move too obviously, the other families will see it as aggression, as breaking the rules. But if I can position myself as a peacemaker, as someone helping to restore order, then my expansion becomes legitimate, even welcomed. And you want my advice on how to accomplish this?" Tomas felt the familiar weight settling over him, the responsibility of decisions that would affect hundreds of lives, that would determine who prospered and who died. "This is what you were planning all along, is it not? This is why you really wanted me back. Not for my connection to the old families, but for situations exactly like this. You need someone who can navigate the politics, who can make aggression look like assistance." Don Bellini smiled, acknowledging the truth. "You were always the best at this, Santoro. Don Carmine conquered through your wisdom more than through violence. I want to do the same. So tell me, how do I take what I want from the Colombos without starting a war?" Tomas was silent for a long moment, staring into his scotch as if the amber liquid held answers. The old him, the consigliere who had served Don Carmine, would have already been calculating the angles, identifying the key players, planning the moves that would give his Don maximum advantage. But that man had supposedly died in a small village, caring for forgotten elderly people. Yet here he was, alive and advising again, because the alternative was unthinkable. "You need an invitation," Tomas said finally. Someone inside the Colombo family who asks for your help, who provides the justification for your involvement. Find a capo who is loyal to Anthony, but realistic about his chances. Offer to support Anthony's position, to provide soldiers and resources to help him consolidate power. In exchange, you get business opportunities, territory concessions, favorable terms on shared operations. And if Anthony still falls despite my support, then you are supporting the legitimate Don, trying to preserve order and stability. No one can fault you for that. And when the new Don takes over, you are already positioned inside their organization, already have relationships and leverage. You either maintain what you gained, or you use it as a bargaining chip to get something else you want. Don Bellini laughed, delighted. This is why I needed you. You see the whole board, all the pieces, all the moves. He raised his glass in a toast. To the future of the Bellini family, consigliere Santoro, may your wisdom make us richer than anyone could imagine. Tomas raised his glass mechanically, drank without tasting. He had just helped design a strategy that would likely destroy the Colombo family, that would get people killed, that would expand Don Bellini's empire at the cost of blood and betrayal. And he had done it smoothly, professionally, with the casual expertise of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. Father Thomas Brennan would have been horrified. Tomas Santoro simply noted it as another weight on scales that would never balance. The meeting ended. Tomas returned to his room, but sleep remained impossible. He stood at the window, staring out at the city lights, and allowed himself to remember the morning prayers at St. Agnes, the simple ritual of distributing medications, the grateful smiles of people who had nothing and expected nothing. He had failed them, not just by leaving, but by returning so easily to what he had been, by slipping back into the role of advisor and strategist without the resistance he had hoped to feel. 15 years of service and prayer had changed nothing fundamental. He was still Tomas Santoro, still capable of the cold calculations that determined life and death, still willing to help build empires on foundations of violence. The realization was crushing. A knock at his door pulled him from his thoughts. He opened it to find Vincent Marcello standing in the hallway, his expression troubled. "We need to talk," Vincent said quietly. "Somewhere private." Tomas gestured him in, closed the door. "What is wrong?" Vincent paced, agitated in a way Tomas had not seen before. "I think Carlo is planning something. Against you." Tomas was not surprised. Carlo's hatred had been obvious from the beginning. "What did you hear?" "He has been talking to some of the old-timers, soldiers who remember Don Carmine, who still have loyalty to his memory. Carlo is telling them that you betrayed the Don, that you are using the boss for your own purposes, that you will betray him too when it suits you." Vincent stopped pacing, met Tomas's eyes. "He is building support for a move against you. How many are listening? Maybe a dozen. Not enough to challenge the boss openly, but enough to make trouble if Carlo decides to act." Tomas considered this, ran through the implications. Carlo was Don Bellini's consigliere before Tomas arrived. He had been pushed aside, demoted in everything but title, his advice ignored in favor of the legendary Santoro. The humiliation must have been unbearable. And Carlo had been there the night Don Carmine died, had seen Tomas leave before the massacre. His hatred was personal, rooted in genuine belief that Tomas was a traitor. "What do you think I should do?" Tomas asked, curious about Vincent's answer. "Tell Don Bellini. Let him handle Carlo." Vincent said it immediately, automatically, the response of a man trained to trust the hierarchy. The boss protects his people. He will not let Carlo move against you. "And if Don Bellini decides that keeping Carlo happy is more valuable than keeping me," Tomas suggested. "I am useful now, but I am also a reminder of the old families, old loyalties that might conflict with Marco's vision for the future. If Carlo forces him to choose, he might decide that eliminating me is the simpler solution." Vincent looked uncomfortable. "The boss needs you, he said so himself, for now." Tomas moved to the window, looked out at the darkness. "But men like Marco Bellini use people until they stop being useful, then discard them. It is not cruelty, merely pragmatism. The moment I become more trouble than I am worth, I will be eliminated. So what will you do?" The question hung between them. Tomas could go to Don Bellini, could use his position to have Carlo removed or killed. It would be simple, efficient, the sort of ruthless action that had kept him alive through decades in this world. But it would also confirm Carlo's accusations, would prove that Tomas was willing to eliminate anyone who threatened him, would make the other soldiers wonder if Carlo had been right about betrayal. Alternatively, he could do nothing, could wait and see if Carlo actually moved against him. But that was gambling with his life, trusting that Carlo would either lose his nerve or be stopped by others. Passive strategies rarely succeeded in this world. Action, swift and decisive, was usually the only way to survive. Or there was a third option, one that Father Thomas Brennan might have suggested, one that Thomas Santoro would never have considered in the old days. "I will talk to him," Tomas said, to Carlo, privately. Vincent stared at him like he had lost his mind. "Talk to him. The man wants you dead. What possible good will talking do? Perhaps none." Tomas turned from the window, his decision made. "But perhaps I can make him understand that we are not enemies, that his anger is directed at the wrong target. I owe him that much at least, an attempt at truth before resorting to violence. This is insane." Vincent shook his head. "You are going to get yourself killed, and the boss is going to blame me for not stopping you." "Then do not tell him. Give me 24 hours to try. If I fail, if Carlo moves against me, you can tell Don Bellini everything and position yourself as the loyal soldier who tried to warn the foolish consigliere." Vincent did not look reassured, but he nodded reluctantly. 24 hours. Then I am going to the boss whether you like it or not." After Vincent left, Tomas sat in the darkness and thought about Carlo Reggio, a driver who had risen to consigliere through loyalty and service, who had lost his position to a ghost from the past, who believed with absolute certainty that Tomas had betrayed Don Carmine. Carlo's hatred was not political or strategic. It was moral, rooted in a code that said, betrayal of your Don was the ultimate sin. And perhaps, Tomas thought with bitter irony, Carlo was right. The next morning, Tomas found Carlo in the mansion's security office, reviewing camera footage from the previous night. The older man looked up as Tomas entered, his expression immediately hardening with suspicion and dislike. "What do you want, Santoro?" "To talk. Alone." Tomas closed the door, noting that Carlo's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon. "I know you hate me. I know you think I betrayed Don Carmine, and I know you are planning to move against me." Carlo's eyes narrowed. "You wired. Is this some kind of setup?" "No." Tomas held his arms out. "You can check if you want. I'm not recording this. I simply want to tell you the truth before one of us ends up dead." "The truth?" Carlo laughed harshly. "You would not know truth if it shot you in the face." "Perhaps." Tomas sat down uninvited, forcing himself to appear relaxed despite the tension crackling between them. "But I'm going to tell you anyway, and you can decide what to believe." He told Carlo everything, the whole story of that final night, of his suspicions about Vincent Carlucci, of Don Carmine's refusal to listen, of the impossible choice between dying loyal or living in shame. He told Carlo about the 15 years in St. Agnes, about the elderly residents, about trying to find redemption through service. He told Carlo about the weight of survival, about the guilt that never faded, no matter how many prayers he recited or bedpans he changed. Carlo listened in silence, his face revealing nothing. When Tomas finished, they sat in that silence for a long moment. "Why should I believe any of this?" Carlo finally asked. "You could be lying. You could have been part of the conspiracy, and this is just another story to cover your betrayal. You are right. You have no reason to believe me." Tomas met his gaze steadily. "But ask yourself this. If I had been part of the conspiracy, if I had helped coordinate the massacre, why would I have disappeared? I would have been rewarded, given power and territory. Instead, I fled to a village in the middle of nowhere and spent 15 years pretending to be a priest. Does that sound like the action of a successful conspirator?" Carlo considered this, his expression thoughtful. "It sounds like the action of a coward." The accusation stung because it was true. I will not argue with that. I was a coward. I should have stayed with Don Carmine, should have died beside him even if he would not listen to my warnings. But I chose to live, and I have spent every day since wondering if that was the right choice. "And now you are back," Carlo said. "Back to advising another Don. Back to the same life you ran from." "What changed?" "Nothing changed." Tomas smiled bitterly. "That is the problem. I tried to be a different man, tried to wash off the blood and become something better. But the moment violence threatened people I cared about, the moment I had to choose between my principles and their lives, I folded immediately. I came back because Don Bellini threatened to kill 12 innocent elderly people if I refused, and I decided their lives were worth more than my redemption." Carlo was silent, processing this. "Does the boss know? About the village, about why you really left?" "He knows some of it. Not all." Tomas leaned forward. "Carlo, I am not asking you to forgive me or to trust me. I am simply asking you to redirect your anger toward the real enemy. Vincent Carlucci is dead, but the men he recruited, the capos who helped orchestrate the massacre, some of them are still alive, still in positions of power. If you want justice for Don Carmine, help me identify them. Help me make them answer for what they did." "And why would you care about justice for Don Carmine?" Carlo demanded. "You abandoned him." "Because I loved him." The words came out raw, painful, true. Don Carmine was more than my Don. He was my friend, my mentor, the closest thing to family I had. Leaving him to die, even to save my own life, destroyed something in me. If I can give him justice now, even 15 years late, maybe it will mean something. Carlo studied him for a long moment, searching for deception, for the lie beneath the words. Whatever he saw made his expression soften slightly, the hatred dimming if not disappearing entirely. "I will think about what you have said," Carlo finally replied. "But know this, Santoro. If I discover you are lying, if I find proof that you were part of the conspiracy, I will kill you myself. I do not care about Don Bellini's protection or your legendary reputation. I will put a bullet in your head and sleep soundly that night. Fair enough?" Tomas stood, offered his hand. "That is all I ask, a chance to prove that I am telling the truth." Carlo looked at the offered hand for a moment, then shook it briefly, his grip firm and warning. "Do not make me regret this." After leaving the security office, Tomas returned to his room and allowed himself to feel the exhaustion, the weight of 15 years and decades before that pressing down on him. He had bought himself time with Carlo, had possibly even planted the seeds of an alliance, but the cost was exposing his vulnerabilities, admitting to cowardice and failure, revealing the guilt that ate at him every day. In the world of the families, weakness was death. Yet somehow showing weakness to Carlo had felt more honest than any of the strategic advice he had given Don Bellini, more real than the mask of the legendary consigliere he wore for the soldiers. Perhaps Father Thomas Brennan was not entirely dead after all. Perhaps somewhere in the darkness where Tomas Santoro lived, a small light still burned, refusing to be extinguished. It was a dangerous hope, but it was hope nonetheless. 3 weeks after Tomas's conversation with Carlo, the situation with the Colombo family reached its breaking point. Anthony Colombo, the weak Don who had inherited his father's empire, was found dead in his car outside a restaurant in Queens. The official story was a heart attack, but everyone in the underworld knew the truth. He had been removed quietly and efficiently by his own people. Don Bellini moved immediately, exactly as Tomas had advised. He reached out to the capo who had orchestrated Anthony's removal, a man named Sal Messina, offering support and resources in exchange for business partnerships. Sal, finding himself suddenly responsible for a fractured family and lacking the infrastructure to consolidate power quickly, accepted gratefully. Within 48 hours, Don Bellini's people were operating in Colombo territory, and Sal was publicly praising the Bellini family for their assistance in this difficult time. The other families watched, but did not interfere. Don Bellini had positioned himself perfectly, appearing to help rather than exploit, maintaining the appearance of respect for the old codes, even as he violated their spirit. It was a masterful execution of strategy, and everyone knew who had designed it. Tomas Santoro's legend grew even larger. Soldiers from other families began reaching out, asking if the consigliere might be available to advise on their own situations. Don Bellini reveled in the attention, in the power that came from having the most respected advisor in New York. He threw a dinner to celebrate the Colombo arrangement, inviting capos from all 5 families, making a show of his success and his consigliere's wisdom. Tomas attended the dinner because he had no choice, sat at Don Bellini's right hand because that was his position, smiled and accepted compliments because that was expected, but inside, where Father Thomas Brennan still lived in diminishing space, he felt sick. The Colombo family was in chaos. Anthony's wife and children had been forced to flee the city. Soldiers loyal to Anthony were being systematically removed, disappeared into the night or found floating in various rivers. Businesses were being absorbed, territory redistributed, lives destroyed, and it was all proceeding according to the strategy Tomas had designed. He had done this. His advice, his expertise, his legendary strategic mind had made it possible. And Don Bellini wanted more, was already asking about expansion into New Jersey, about neutralizing a rival gang in the Bronx, about opportunities in Philadelphia. The appetite for power was insatiable, and Tomas was the tool that fed it. Late that night, after the celebration ended and the mansion grew quiet, Tomas found Carlo in the security office again. The older man looked up as he entered, his expression no longer hostile, but not quite friendly either. They had maintained an uneasy truce since their conversation, Carlo watching Tomas carefully, but not actively working against him. "We need to talk," Tomas said, closing the door, "about what I promised you, finding the men who helped Vincent Carlucci orchestrate the massacre." Carlo set down the tablet he had been reviewing. "I have been thinking about that, wondering if you were serious or just trying to buy my silence." I was serious. Tomas sat down heavily. "I have been going through old records, talking to people, putting together what happened that night, and I have identified 3 men who were definitely part of the conspiracy. All of them are still alive, all still in positions of power." "Who?" Tomas pulled out a piece of paper, names written in his careful script. First, Dominic Russo. He was underboss in the Gambino family 15 years ago. He disappeared the week after the massacre, supposedly went into hiding because he feared retaliation. But I think he disappeared because he was afraid someone would connect him to Vincent. He resurfaced 6 months later, took over the Gambino family when the old Don died, and has been running it ever since. Carlo leaned forward, interested despite himself. "And the others?" "Paul Giordano. He was a capo in the Lucchese family. Rose to underboss after the massacre when his Don was killed. And Thomas Castellano, who was Vincent Carlucci's driver before moving into enforcement. He is a capo in the Genovese family now, controls their operations in Staten Island." Carlo studied the names, his jaw tight. "You are certain about this, as certain as I can be without confession." Tomas met his eyes. "But here is the problem. These men are powerful, protected. Going after them would start wars. Even if I told Don Bellini everything, even if he believed me, he would not move against them. The risk would outweigh any benefit. So what are you proposing? That we do it ourselves?" Tomas said it calmly, as if suggesting they go for coffee. "You and me. We gather the proof. We document their involvement. And we bring it to the commission. Let the 5 families decide what justice looks like." Carlo stared at him. "You are talking about investigating 3 made men without authorization. If we are caught, if Don Bellini finds out, he will kill us both for going behind his back." "I know," Tomas acknowledged, "but I promised you the truth about what happened to Don Carmine. And I promised myself a long time ago that if I ever had the chance to make things right, I would take it, even if it cost me everything." "Why now?" Carlo demanded. "You have been back for weeks. You have been advising Don Bellini, helping him build his empire. Why suddenly decide to pursue justice because I am tired of being Tomas Santoro?" Tomas smiled bitterly. "I spent 15 years trying to be Father Thomas Brennan, trying to be a good man who helped people. And the moment I came back here, the moment I started advising again, I slipped right back into being the consigliere who enables violence and destruction. I designed the strategy that destroyed the Colombo family, Carlo. Anthony's children are orphans because of me. How many more families do I have to destroy before I admit that this is not who I want to be?" Carlo was silent for a long moment. Then quietly he said, You know this will probably get us killed. Probably. Tomas agreed. But maybe, just maybe, we can do one good thing before that happens. Maybe we can give Don Carmine the justice he deserved. Is that not worth the risk? Carlo looked at the paper with the 3 names, then back at Tomas. His expression was complicated, mixing suspicion with something that might have been respect. You are either the bravest man I have ever met, or the most insane. Can it not be both? Despite everything, Carlo smiled. It was a small smile, brief but genuine. All right, Santoro, I will help you. But if this goes wrong, if we get caught, I am blaming everything on you. Fair enough. They shook hands, and this time the grip was firm, sealing an alliance that would have seemed impossible a month ago. 2 men who should have been enemies, united by a shared desire for justice and a shared understanding that some debts could never be repaid, only acknowledged. Over the next 2 weeks, they worked in secret. Carlo used his access to security systems to pull old footage, to track movements and communications from 15 years ago. Tomas reached out to contacts from his old life, people who owed him favors, who remembered when Consigliere Santoro's word had been law. Slowly, piece by piece, they assembled the evidence. Dominic Russo had been in communication with Vincent Carlucci in the months before the massacre, meeting secretly in locations that suggested conspiracy. Paul Giordano had made large cash withdrawals the week before the Night of Long Knives, money that likely went to hiring the hitmen who carried out the coordinated attacks. Thomas Castellano had been Vincent's driver, but had called in sick that night, conveniently absent from the dinner where his boss was killed. None of it was absolute proof, but together it painted a damning picture. These men had helped orchestrate the massacre, had betrayed their dons for power and territory, and had gotten away with it for 15 years. The question was what to do with the evidence. The commission, the Council of Dons from all 5 families, could theoretically order executions based on this information. But getting the evidence to them without Don Bellini finding out was nearly impossible. He monitored everything, controlled access to other families, would view any independent action by his consigliere as betrayal. Tomas was wrestling with this problem, sitting in his room late at night, when Vincent Marcello knocked on his door. The young underboss looked nervous, a rarity for him. "We have a problem," Vincent said without preamble. "Don Bellini wants to move against the Lucchese family. Says they are disrespecting us, operating in our territory without permission. He wants you to plan a hit on Paul Giordano, their underboss. Wants it done this week." Tomas felt his blood run cold. Paul Giordano, one of the 3 conspirators. Don Bellini wanted him dead, which should have been justice, should have been what Tomas and Carlo were working toward. But not like this, not as part of a territorial dispute, not without the truth coming out, not without Don Carmine's memory being honored. Did he say why now? Tomas asked. What did Giordano do to provoke this? Vincent shrugged. Some dispute about a union contract. Giordano allegedly bribed some of our guys to switch sides. The boss sees it as disrespect that has to be answered. Or, Tomas thought, Don Bellini sees an opportunity to eliminate a rival and wants his consigliere to plan it. Either way, refusing would raise questions Tomas could not afford to answer. "Tell Don Bellini I will have a plan for him tomorrow." After Vincent left, Tomas sat in the darkness and thought about paths not taken, about choices that had seemed impossible but now felt inevitable. He had tried to do this the right way, to pursue justice through legitimate channels. But the world he lived in had no legitimate channels, recognized no justice beyond power and fear. Perhaps it was time to stop pretending otherwise. He found Carlo in the early morning hours, pulled him into a private room. Change of plans. "Don Bellini wants Giordano dead by the end of the week. We need to move faster than I hoped." Carlo understood immediately. "You are going to kill all 3 of them. The conspirators, no." Tomas shook his head. "We are going to expose them, all of them, including what they did to Don Carmine. But we need to do it in a way that protects Don Bellini, that makes him look strong rather than deceived." "How?" Tomas laid out the plan. It was risky, required perfect timing and more luck than he was comfortable depending on, but it was the only option he could see. They would arrange a meeting of the three conspirators, Russo, Giordano, and Castellano, under the pretext of discussing a business opportunity. During that meeting, Tomas and Carlo would confront them with the evidence, would force confessions. The whole thing would be recorded, documented, and then delivered to the commission with Don Bellini's blessing, as if he had ordered the investigation himself. It was insane. It relied on the conspirators confessing, on Don Bellini accepting a situation he had not authorized, on the commission caring about 15-year-old crimes when everyone had moved on. But it was also the only plan that served justice rather than just adding more bodies to the pile. Carlo listened, his expression skeptical. "This will never work." "Probably not," Tomas agreed. "But I am out of better ideas." "Are you with me?" Carlo was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. "I must be as insane as you are. Yes, I am with you. But when this gets us killed, I am going to be very angry with you in the afterlife." Fair enough, they set it up carefully. Tomas approached Don Bellini with a proposal. Instead of hitting Giordano directly, why not lure him into a trap? Make him come to neutral territory for a sit-down about the union dispute. Once there, they could eliminate him quietly, make it look like natural causes or an accident, avoid the messy retaliation that an obvious hit would provoke. Don Bellini loved the idea, praised Tomas for his strategic thinking. He authorized the meeting, told Tomas to handle the details however he saw fit. He even suggested inviting other underbosses from the Lucchese family, make it seem like a legitimate peace negotiation before springing the trap. Tomas used that authorization to extend invitations to Dominic Russo and Thomas Castellano as well, framing it as a major sit-down to resolve multiple territorial disputes, an opportunity for the old guard to settle their differences before the young soldiers started an unnecessary war. All three accepted, curious about what the legendary Thomas Santoro wanted to discuss. The meeting was set for a restaurant in Brooklyn, a place neutral enough that no one would feel threatened, public enough that open violence would be difficult. Tomas arrived early with Carlo, both of them armed but hoping desperately that weapons would not be necessary. They had recording equipment hidden in the private room where the meeting would take place, cameras and microphones that would capture everything. Russo arrived first, a heavy-set man in his 70s who moved with the careful steps of someone whose knees no longer worked properly. He greeted Tomas with the respect due to a fellow consigliere, suspicious but willing to listen. Giordano came next, younger and fitter, his eyes calculating, already trying to determine the angles what Tomas really wanted. Castellano was last, a thick-necked enforcer who had risen through brutality rather than intelligence, looking uncomfortable in a suit, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. They sat around a table in the private room, just the five of them. Tomas at the head, Carlo beside him, the three conspirators facing them with varying degrees of suspicion and confusion. "Thank you for coming," Tomas began. "I know you are all wondering why I called this meeting, why I wanted to speak with the three of you specifically. You said something about resolving territorial disputes," Russo said, his voice gravelly from decades of smoking. "About preventing unnecessary wars. I am here because I remember when you advised Don Carmine, remember that your words carried wisdom. But I confess, I'm confused about what territories we have in dispute. That was a lie, of course, a pretext to get you here." Tomas met each of their eyes in turn. "The truth is, I wanted to talk about something that happened 15 years ago, the Night of Long Knives. The night Don Carmine and 24 others were killed. The temperature in the room dropped. Giordano's hand moved toward his jacket, toward the weapon surely holstered there, but Carlo was already holding a gun pointed casually at the three men. "Nobody is going to get hurt," Carlo said calmly. "We just want to talk. But if you try anything stupid, I will shoot you. Understand?" The three men nodded, their faces carefully neutral, revealing nothing. 15 years ago, Tomas continued, Vincent Carlucci organized a conspiracy to kill his Don and 24 others. He recruited underbosses and capos from all 5 families, men who were tired of their Dons, who wanted power for themselves. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity. Simultaneous hits, coordinated so that no family could respond before the others were also crippled. It almost worked. He paused. But Vincent made a mistake. He trusted people who were willing to betray their dons, and men who betray once will betray again. So Vincent ended up dead too, killed by his own conspirators who did not want witnesses. Nobody spoke. The three men stared at Tomas with expressions that confirmed everything, even as they said nothing. I spent 15 years wondering who helped Vincent. Tomas said quietly. Who gave him the information, the resources, the courage to attempt something so audacious, and now after weeks of investigation, I know. He pointed at Russo. You coordinated with Vincent, helped him recruit the others, provided intelligence about your Don's schedule and security. He pointed at Giordano. You financed the operation, hired the hitmen, made sure everyone was paid enough to take the risk. He pointed at Castellano. And you were Vincent's inside man, his driver, who conveniently was not there when he was killed, who probably pulled the trigger yourself to eliminate the witness. Still silence. But Tomas could see it in their eyes, see the calculation as they tried to determine how much he really knew, whether he had proof or just suspicions. Here is what is going to happen, Tomas said. You are going to confess, all three of you. You are going to tell me everything about the conspiracy, about your roles, about why you did it. And then I am going to take that confession to the commission, and they are going to decide what justice looks like. Russo laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. You think we are just going to confess? You must be senile, Santoro. Even if what you say is true and I am not admitting anything, why would we give you the rope to hang us with? Because the alternative is worse. Tomas leaned forward. I am offering you a chance to confess, to show remorse, to face judgment from the commission. If you refuse, I will have you killed right now, right here, and I will tell the commission you tried to ambush me, that you were planning to eliminate me because I was getting too close to the truth. Your families will be shamed, your names will be erased, and nobody will ever know the real reason you died. He paused. But if you confess, if you show respect for the old codes by admitting your crimes, the commission might show mercy. Maybe they just strip your positions, exile you instead of killing you. Maybe they let you retire quietly. Or maybe they execute you, but at least you die with the truth known, with your families understanding why. Is that not better than dying a liar? The three men looked at each other, silent communication passing between them. Tomas could see them weighing their options, calculating odds, trying to find a way out. But there was no way out, and eventually they realized it. Castellano broke first. Fine, I will tell you what you want to know. But I want immunity, want protection, want my family taken care of. No deals, Carlo said flatly. You confess because it is the right thing to do, or you confess because we torture it out of you. Those are your options. Castellano looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Carlo's expression made him reconsider. He slumped in his chair, defeated. It was Vincent's idea. He came to me about 18 months before the hit, said he was tired of Don Carmine's weakness, tired of watching opportunities slip away because the Don was too cautious. He wanted to take over, but he knew he could not do it alone. So he started recruiting, finding other underbosses who felt the same way about their Dons. And you went along with it, Tomas said. Helped him. Betrayed the man who had given you everything. Vincent promised me a territory, promised me I would be a capo in the new order. Castellano would not meet Tomas's eyes. I was just a driver. I wanted more. Is that so wrong? Betraying your Don is always wrong, Carlo said, his voice hard. It is the first rule, the most sacred oath, and you broke it for ambition. Giordano spoke up next, his voice defiant. It was not just ambition. Our Dons were old, stuck in old ways. The world was changing, and they refused to see it. Vincent understood that. He wanted to build something new, something stronger. We all did. So you killed 24 men to build your paradise, Tomas said. How did that work out? Better than you think, Russo interjected. Look at what we built from the ashes. Stronger families, more profitable operations, less infighting. The old Dons were holding us back. We freed the families to grow. You destroyed the families, Carlo shot back. You broke every code, betrayed every oath. Dozens died. Hundreds more in the chaos that followed. You caused years of warfare for your ambition. The argument continued, confessions spilling out mixed with justifications and accusations. The recording equipment captured everything, every admission, every detail about the conspiracy. After 2 hours, Thomas had what he needed. The full story of how Vincent Carlucci had recruited these three and others, how they had planned and executed the massacre, how they had eliminated Vincent and the other conspirators afterward to protect themselves. When it was done, when the confessions were complete, Thomas stood. "Thank you for your honesty. Carlo will escort you out. You are free to go for now. But the commission will be in touch soon. I suggest you use the time to put your affairs in order." "What about Don Bellini?" Giordano asked. "You said this was his meeting, that he wanted to resolve disputes. He is going to know we were set up." "Leave Don Bellini to me," Thomas said. "He will be informed of everything, but the commission will hear the truth first. What happens after that is not my concern." After the three men left, escorted by Carlo, who made sure they actually departed, Thomas sat alone in the private room and felt the weight of what he had done settle over him. He had the evidence now, had the confessions, had everything needed to bring justice for Don Carmine. But he had also betrayed Don Bellini's trust, had used his authorization to pursue his own agenda, had put himself in a position where the Don would feel manipulated and deceived. There would be consequences, terrible consequences, but at least this time Tomas Santoro had chosen the right path over the safe one, had chosen justice over survival. Carlo returned, his expression grim. "They are gone. What now? Now we go to Don Bellini, tell him everything, and hope he does not kill us on the spot." They found Don Bellini in his office, going through financial reports with Vincent. The Don looked up as they entered, smiled at first, then frowned as he saw their expressions. "What is wrong?" "Don Bellini," Tomas said. "We need to talk about the meeting with Giordano and the others. It did not go quite as planned." He told him everything. The investigation into the massacre, the evidence against Russo, Giordano, and Castellano, the confessions they had just obtained. He laid it all out, holding nothing back, watching Don Bellini's expression shift from confusion to anger to something more complex. When Tomas finished, the office was silent, except for the ticking of that antique clock. Don Bellini stood, walked to the window, his back to them. Vincent looked between Tomas and Carlo, his hand resting on his weapon, clearly uncertain about what was happening. "You went behind my back," Don Bellini said finally, his voice dangerously quiet. "You used my authorization to pursue your own agenda. You put me in a position where I look foolish, where people will say my consigliere manipulates me." "Yes," Tomas acknowledged, "I did all of that, and I am sorry for the disrespect. But I gave you my word that I would find justice for Don Carmine, and I kept that word, even though it meant risking everything." Don Bellini turned, his expression unreadable. "You realize I should kill you for this. You and Carlo both. It is the only way to maintain respect, to show that nobody defies me." "I understand," Tomas said calmly. "If that is your decision, I will not resist. But before you do, listen to what I am proposing." He laid out the next step. Take the evidence to the commission, present it as Don Bellini's investigation, frame it as him being so powerful and so connected that he could uncover a 15-year-old conspiracy that everyone else had missed. Let the commission order the executions. Let Don Bellini take credit for finally bringing justice for the Night of Long Knives. It would cement his reputation as a Don who honored the old codes, who cared about more than just profit, who had the legendary Tomas Santoro working exclusively for him. It was a political masterstroke, and Don Bellini recognized it immediately. His anger faded, replaced by calculation, by recognition of opportunity. "You are saying I can turn your betrayal into my triumph," he said slowly, "that I can use this to elevate my status even higher." "Yes, but more than that, you can be the Don who finally honored Don Carmine's memory, who proved that betrayal of your Don is not forgotten, not forgiven, even after 15 years. That means something, Don Bellini. That means respect that money cannot buy." Don Bellini studied him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "You magnificent bastard! You planned this from the beginning, did you not? You knew I would see the political advantage, would choose ambition over anger." "I hoped," Tomas admitted, "but I was prepared for the alternative." The meeting with the commission happened 3 days later. Don Bellini presented the evidence himself, with Thomas and Carlo beside him, telling the story of how his investigation had uncovered the conspiracy. The other Dons listened with varying degrees of shock and anger, recognizing the names, understanding what this meant. Dominic Russo, Paul Giordano, and Thomas Castellano were summoned before the commission. They tried to deny, then to justify, then finally to beg for mercy. The commission deliberated for less than an hour before delivering their judgment. All three were guilty of the ultimate crime, betrayal of their dons. The sentence was death, to be carried out immediately. The executions were handled quietly, professionally. 3 bullets, 3 bodies disposed of, 3 names erased from the family rosters. Justice, 15 years delayed but finally delivered. Afterward, Don Bellini was praised for his diligence, for his respect for the old codes, for having the wisdom to employ consigliere Santoro. His reputation soared. The Bellini family became even more powerful, and other families sought his counsel, wanted his blessing for their operations. Tomas watched it all with weary satisfaction. He had kept his promise to Carlo, had honored Don Carmine's memory, had brought justice to men who thought they had escaped consequences. It had cost him his soul and his peace, but perhaps those were already lost. 2 weeks after the executions, Don Bellini summoned Tomas to his office. Just the two of them, late at night, the mansion quiet. "I have been thinking about what you did," Don Bellini said without preamble. "About how you manipulated me, used me to achieve your own goals. In anyone else, I would see that as betrayal worthy of death. But not in me," Tomas said. "Not in the legendary consigliere who just made you the most respected Don in New York." Don Bellini smiled. "Exactly. You used me, Santoro, but you also made me powerful beyond what I imagined. So I'm going to make you an offer. Stay with me. Be my consigliere genuinely this time, with full trust and partnership. Help me build an empire that will last generations. Together, we can remake the families into something stronger than they have ever been." It was tempting. The offer of real power, real influence, the chance to shape the future of organized crime in New York. The old Tomas Santoro, the one who had advised Don Carmine, would have accepted immediately. But that man had died in a village caring for forgotten elderly people, had learned that some things mattered more than power. "I appreciate the offer, Don Bellini," Tomas said carefully, "but I think my time as a consigliere is finished. I kept my promise, honored Don Carmine's memory. Now I would like to return to St. Agnes, to the people I left behind." Don Bellini's expression hardened. "You would choose that pathetic village over this? Over wealth and power and respect? I would choose peace over blood." Tomas met his gaze steadily. "I have spent enough years building empires on foundations of violence. I want to spend what time I have left actually helping people, actually making the world slightly better instead of slightly worse. And if I refuse to let you go, then you will have a consigliere who resents you, who will sabotage you at every opportunity, who will make your life miserable." Tomas smiled. "You said it yourself, Don Bellini. I am magnificent at manipulation. Do you really want me as an enemy?" For a long moment, Don Bellini considered. Then he laughed, genuine amusement breaking through the tension. "You always know exactly what to say, do you not? Fine. Go back to your village, play priest, care for your old people. But understand this, Santoro. If I ever need your counsel, if I ever call on you, you will come. You owe me that much, agreed, one favor whenever you ask it, that is fair." They shook hands, and this time it felt like an ending rather than a beginning. Don Bellini arranged transportation back to St. Agnes, even provided money to support the parish house, a gesture of generosity that was also a subtle reminder of who held power in their relationship. Carlo drove Tomas to the village, the two of them quiet for most of the journey. When they finally arrived, Carlo spoke. "You know you are insane, right? Walking away from all that power, all that respect. Most men would kill for what you are giving up. Most men are idiots." Tomas looked out at the familiar village, at the old church and the house beyond. "I have been given a second chance, Carlo. Very few people get that. I am not going to waste it chasing power I do not want." Carlo nodded slowly. "For what it is worth, I respect what you did. Keeping your promise about Don Carmine even when it cost you everything, that took courage, or stupidity, maybe both." They said their goodbyes, and Tomas walked alone toward the house. It was evening, the sun setting, casting long shadows across the village. He could see lights in the windows of the parish house, could hear voices inside, familiar and welcome. Mrs. Callahan answered his knock, her eyes widening with shock. "Father Thomas, you came back." "I came back," he confirmed, and allowed himself to smile, genuinely this time. "If you will still have me." The elderly residents gathered around, asking questions, expressing relief, making him feel more welcome than he had any right to feel. Sister Mary Catherine hugged him, tears streaming down her aged face. Mr. Doyle complained that his hip had been acting up, and the new priest did not understand his medications properly. Thomas O'Brien asked in confusion if they were having dinner soon. It was chaotic and messy, and absolutely perfect. That night, after everyone was settled and the house was quiet, Tomas sat alone in the small chapel. He still did not pray, still could not quite believe in the God these statues represented. But he sat in the silence and thought about paths taken and prices paid, about justice delayed but finally delivered, about the long, strange journey from Thomas Santoro to Father Thomas Brennan, and back again. He thought about Don Carmine, hoped that wherever the old Don was, he knew that his death had finally been avenged, that the men who betrayed him had faced judgment. He thought about the elderly residents sleeping peacefully in the house, about Mrs. Callahan and Sister Mary Catherine, and all the others who had trusted him, who depended on him. And he thought about the future, about the days and weeks and years he might have left, about how to spend that time in a way that mattered. That meant something beyond accumulating power and instilling fear. Father Thomas Brennan, born from the ashes of Thomas Santoro's past, had tried to be a good man and failed. But perhaps he could try again, with the wisdom of having failed, with the understanding that redemption was not a destination, but a daily choice, a constant effort to do better than yesterday. It would not erase the blood on his hands. Nothing could do that. But maybe, just maybe, it would add enough light to balance some of the darkness, enough compassion to offset some of the cruelty, enough love to justify a life that had caused so much pain. Outside, the village slept peacefully, unaware that it harbored a man who had once been legend, who had advised dons and orchestrated the fall of families. Inside the small chapel, Father Thomas Brennan sat in silence and allowed himself to believe that tomorrow might be different, that the past did not have to define the future, that even men like him could find something resembling grace. It was a fragile hope, as fragile as the eternal flame flickering above the altar, but it was hope nonetheless, and for a man who had lived so long without it, that was more than enough.